Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Good morning, all of you. Welcome to the Sunday service. Today we are going to start the Sunday service. Our speaker is Stephen Subodha. Today he is going to give the Dhamma talk. First we will practice some kind of meditation. After the meditation you can listen to the Dhamma talk. And Venerable Chandasara is going to lead the meditation session. Chandasara, hello. Thank you so much, Venerable Local. Good morning to everybody. Now, shall we practice breathing meditation? First, we want to prepare our mind to spread loving kindness thoughts. So, be seated in a comfortable, upright posture, and just focus on breathing. Breathe in and out very gently and focus on breathing and breathing out as they occur naturally. Shall we breathe in and breathe out gently and naturally, mindfully for a couple of minutes to relax our body and mind. Right now, we are going to spread loving kindness thoughts to all the living beings, including us. Sukhino wa kemino honto sabbe satta bhavantu sukhidatta, in this way. That is, may all the living beings, including me, be physically well. May all the living beings, including me, be safe. May all the living beings, including me, be mentally well. Shall we continue doing meditation, loving kindness meditation in this way until we hear the bell sound? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Venerable Chandasara, for leading the meditation session. Now it's time for us to listen to the Dhamma talk. Hope our Stephen Subodha is there from the other end. Stephen Subodha has been a Dhamma speaker for a long time, and he has given a lot of Dhamma talks at the IBMC. And you can see his Dhamma talks in the YouTube and even in his Facebook. And yes, like this, you can listen to his Dhamma talks in the YouTube and the Facebook. And he has also given his Dhamma talks in many other institutes, places, centers in Los Angeles, in California. Today, we are going to listen to his Dhamma talk. And after the Dhamma talk, if you have any questions, feel free to ask your questions. So with that introduction, I would like to hand over the mic to our Stephen Subodha.
Thank you, Bhante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. So first I want to say hello to our small and comfy bunch of people today. I thought this might happen as we come upon Christmas and people start having a lot of plans for their weekends and during the week and so on. You know, Christmas is an interesting time for me. I've spoken about it in the past, how I'm one of those December babies. You know, my birthday is the day right after Christmas. And so I've had that sense of what I might call birthmas my whole life. I don't think I've ever gotten to experience Christmas as its own distinct celebration in the West. It's always been this thing that always got mixed up with my birthday growing up, to such an extent that when I was very young, I don't think I even really knew the difference. Very small, probably 4 or 5 years old, I thought maybe the tree and all that stuff was for my birthday. I really didn't know. One of the things I think about is how this time of year is known as a happy time, a festive time. You'll hear that this is the happiest season of all, and it works its way into our mindset so much that it even shows up in interesting ways. Recently, I came across this little comic. It's called Savage Chickens. I've never heard of it before, except for when I found it online because some Buddhist friends had been sharing it. In fact, Reverend Kusala at IBMC also shared this as well. And this is one that was put out for the holidays. And it's just a single frame. And in it, we have this like little chicken, who I'm assuming is one of the main characters in this comic, asking a question to Santa Claus. And the chicken says, "Hey, Santa, any advice for the Christmas blues?" And Santa Claus says, "Well, 'tis the season to be jolly, but as a Buddhist, I believe you must first find your inner jolliness." And it's one of those playful ideas. Like, it'd be really funny to think of Santa Claus being this secret Buddhist this whole time that no one had bothered to ask about. Like, well, Santa, what are your views on the holiday? Well, it turns out he's inviting people to find their inner jolliness, which I'm sure was just meant to be, a clever turn of phrase, a little joke, but in my eyes is actually quite accurate, this idea of inner jolliness. And I'll move aside from the jolliness and just talk about inner happiness for the remainder of the talk. But this idea that true happiness is an inner quality. When I think back to all the various Christmases and holidays this season, I've known a lot of people who practice other religions and celebrate other things during this time of year, be that Yule or Hanukkah, or there are some Buddhists that even have a holiday early December. I think it's like a Bodhi Day or something like that in some traditions. So this is, for many people, this festive time when it's at least in our side of the world, the darkest time of the year. It's when the days are shortening, the nights are lengthening, and we get to experience a little bit of cold. In some places more, in Los Angeles less. I think I saw for the forecast last time I checked, Christmas Day itself is going to be a nice, comfortable 76. A nice shorts wearing Christmas. But there is this desire to be happy around this time of year. And when I look at all of the ways that people in my life have gone about that happiness, be they friends and family growing up as a kid, I get this feeling of this kind of forced happiness, forced merriment, this tendency to want things to be a certain way, to try to make things a certain way to be happy. And what I mean by that is the tendency with at least this holiday, because I come from a Catholic family, around Christmas to fill up the time for literal weeks, not just the day itself, with a lot of food, a lot of presents, and a lot of, typically alcohol was a big part of my family growing up too, especially on Christmas Eve. And these ways of trying to make this a happy time externally, when this inner quality, this inner jolliness, but inner happiness that was joked about in this comic, is something that I think that those of us who are drawn to Buddhism, those of us who practice Buddhism, and those of us who call ourselves Buddhists are in the business of doing, of finding ways for inner happiness. At least this is something that I've really thought for a long time, particularly within my tradition of Buddhism. For those of you who might not know, I practice Theravada Buddhism, and specifically, I've been drawn to the forest traditions, predominantly practiced in Thailand, but also in Sri Lanka. There are still forest monks who spend time meditating and things like that, and I tend to be drawn to that. But I also have the scholastic end too, where I like to really dive and delve into the suttas, into the Pali Canon. And in my tradition, as far as I understand it, it is suffused with teachings on happiness. And I thought that that was a fairly, I suppose, a fairly universal concept. But time has shown me differently. I remember one time that there was someone who was attending one of the talks at IBMC, and I was talking about this inner happiness, this true happiness that we're trying to cultivate. And I remember this man who was attending the talk being kind of frustrated, and during the Q&A was saying, I'm not trying to be happy, and said it with such force that I remember being taken aback by it. And I wasn't really sure exactly what then he was seeking in practicing Buddhism. And I'm not even really clear on how the interaction ended. I think I might have just left it. But there was this sense of like, no. Buddhism is not about happiness. I thought, oh, interesting. And then later on, as a student working on my ministerial degree, working on my Master of Divinity, I happened to be in a cohort of students from different Buddhist traditions who were looking to get a degree in ministry and chaplaincy. And we had people practicing different kinds of Theravada, people practicing different types of Mahayana, be that Zen or Pure Land and whatnot. And I remember having a conversation with one of the Zen students. And again, I was talking about this quality of happiness that we're looking to develop. And I saw this Zen student taken aback. And he goes, happiness, I wouldn't call it that. I don't think that's what we're after. And we tried to settle on a word that perhaps he might like better. And I think we found something like contentment. But in any case, happiness is what I want to focus on today, defining true happiness, as I understand it within the Pali Canon and the Theravada tradition, where we do seem to talk about happiness a lot. The term itself in Pali is sukha, and it can be translated as happiness. It can also be translated as like calm or joy or bliss. It can have a variety of meanings, but happiness seems to be the one that we just seems to really connect all the ideas together. And so happiness is what I'll use today. One case where the Buddha goes at length on happiness is within the Kalama Sutta. And this is a very popular sutta amongst those in the West, because it's the Buddha talking to people who are uncertain about what paths are true, what paths are correct, which is a good sutta for us to focus on in the West, because in the same way that the Kalamas were people surrounded, bombarded with various spiritual and philosophical and wellness techniques and methods and traditions, we find ourselves in this same sort of situation where we're really inundated with messages, with people trying to help or perhaps not being all that helpful, but giving us all these messages on how we should live our lives, what we should be doing, what the purpose of life is, what leads to a good life, and so on. So we're a lot like the Kalamas in that respect. And so the Buddha, in talking to them, brings up important points that are points that, if you've been studying Buddhism for a while, will be familiar. The Buddha says, when you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the observant, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. And for those of us who study the Dhamma to practice it, to put it into practice, we're often familiar with the first three. We look at skillfulness. We look at whether things are kusala or akusala. We're very particular about the kind of actions we do in body, in speech, and mind, because we're seeking out what is skillful. These qualities are blameless. This is something that I spoke on, I think, sometime earlier this year, that we can talk about blamelessness, but we can also talk about harmlessness, that we want to make sure that our actions are beneficial to ourselves and others. These qualities are praised by the observant. This is also something that I discussed, I think, pretty sure I discussed this earlier this year too, the idea that the things that we do, we're trying to participate in the habits of the noble ones, the way of life of those who have attained some measure of awakening, whether they be a stream enter, once returner, a non-returner, or an arahant. There's a certain way that such people live, and a lot of the Eightfold Path is training the mind, but also emulating their behavior, practicing it to the point of perfection. But then there's this other quality that I think gets a lot less attention, I think, in the West, which is this idea that whatever it is that we're practicing, we test it, we look at it, we observe it to see that when it's adopted and carried out, that it does lead to welfare and happiness. And then when we do something that meets all of these, that these actions are skillful, they're blameless, they're praised by the observant or the noble ones, that when they're carried out lead to welfare and happiness. These are things that we enter and remain in, that this is the path that we're working on. We're working on something that's for our long-term welfare and happiness. And this, in the case of the Kalamas, is the Buddha talking to people that weren't even students of his. He's just giving them advice in general, like, hey, like if you're going to make sense of your sort of interior life, your spiritual life, or whatever we want to call it, the sense of what's happening in your mind and your heart, and you want to make sure that what you're doing is worthwhile, this is a good measure to have. And it just so happens to be that these same measures, when we apply it to the Eightfold Path, are met. We see that as we continue to put these into practice, we see that what we're doing is skillful. We see that as we follow things like the precepts and really work on removing obstacles and hindrances in the mind, that it leads to actions that are also blameless, harmless, that we're doing things that the Buddha himself would have lauded us for doing, and all of his disciples that have attained some measure of awakening would also applaud us for doing. And then there's this other aspect, that when we look inside and see what qualities we're manifesting, what qualities we're bringing up into ourselves, do we see that we're better off for having done them? Are we well because we're putting this into practice? And also, are we having a measure of happiness? One of my teachers, the way he talks about it is that we train ourselves to be connoisseurs of happiness. And I love that phrase, this idea that there are many ways to be happy in this world, a lot of things that we can do that bring us joy, that bring us bliss, that bring us satisfaction and contentment, that bring us happiness. But a lot of those things, when we really observe them, we can see that by doing them, we might be harming others or harming ourselves, or doing something that really in the end is ephemeral, not lasting, not permanent, and not secure. And so we can start turning our minds towards something more secure in terms of our happiness, looking at these other aspects. And I would say that the measure of what counts as true happiness also plays very well into what is skillful and blameless, and what is praised by the observant. In the Dhammapada, for example, there's a whole chapter on happiness, where the Buddha expounds at length how the path and also its goal is a happy one, something that we do, and it lifts our spirits, so to speak. It really soothes us, and gets into all the cracks where the pain is, and fills it up until the pain isn't there. In fact, when we talk about dukkha in Buddhism. We're talking about suffering, but we can also translate it as stress, and we can see the contrasting terms there of, on the one hand, dukkha as suffering and stress, and sukha as happiness, as joy, as bliss, contentment. And in this passage, in this chapter rather of the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, how very happily we live, free from hostility, among those who are hostile, among hostile people, free from hostility we dwell. How very happily we live, free from misery, among those who are miserable, among miserable people, free from misery we dwell. How very happily we live, free from busyness, among those who are busy, among busy people, free from busyness we dwell. How very happily we live, we who have nothing. We will feed on rapture like the radiant gods. Winning gives birth to hostility. Losing, one lies down in pain. The calmed lie down with ease, having set winning and losing aside. There's no fire like passion, no loss like anger, no pain like the aggregates, no ease other than peace. Hunger, the foremost illness, fabrications, the foremost pain. For one knowing this truth as it has come to be, unbinding, is the foremost ease. And here, ease, the translator is translating sukha as ease, but we can also translate as happiness. For one knowing this truth as it has come to be, unbinding, is the foremost happiness. Freedom from illness, the foremost good fortune, contentment, the foremost wealth, truth, the foremost kinship, unbinding, the foremost ease or the foremost happiness. Drinking the nourishment, the flavor of seclusion and calm, one is free from evil, devoid of distress, refreshed with the nourishment of rapture in the Dhamma. It's good to see noble ones, happy their company, always. Through not seeing fools constantly, one would be happy. Now, by not seeing fools, we can translate this term as also one who is ignorant or deluded, essentially those that would be in our lives and try to influence us away from the path, try to influence us into maybe bad habits from our past as well. So through not interacting with these people constantly, one would be happy. So to not let ourselves be dissuaded from the path, dissuaded from the practice. For living with a fool, one grieves a long time. Painful is communion with fools, as with an enemy, always. Happy is communion with the enlightened, as with a gathering of kin. So the enlightened person, discerning, learned, enduring, dutiful, noble, intelligent, a person of integrity, follow one of this sort, as the moon the path of the zodiac stars. So we can see in this chapter of the Dhammapada that just how much this quality of sukha is important, how it's something that pervades the path. I've shared many times the idea that the Buddha taught something that he described as good and admirable in the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's not something that's meant to hurt. It's not something that's meant to be a struggle. And if we approach the path that way, then it might be a pointer to us to start shifting the way we practice and to shift who we practice with. We wouldn't want to practice with those that teach us that the path is a miserable one, or the path is a painful one, or the path is a hard one. Because the idea that happiness, or in this case, ease, is something that we can feed on and be nourished on, is something that the Buddha talks about again and again in the Pali Canon. We see passages here, how very happily we live, we who have nothing, we will feed on rapture like the radiant gods. And specifically, the Buddha there is talking about the rapture of sitting in meditation, of practicing good qualities of the mind, good mental qualities, the feeling of getting rid of the defilements and the hindrances of the mind, that sense of refreshment that happens as we develop good qualities. So this ends up being something that we can really take delight in, this practice that we're doing. Drinking the nourishment, the flavor of seclusion and calm. This one passage in particular, one is freed from evil, devoid of distress, refreshed with the nourishment of rapture in the Dhamma. It's important, I've found, that, in this season of gift giving, to reflect on the gift that is the Dhamma in our lives and to take nourishment in that. When the Buddha talks about hunger as this bad quality, what he means is that the way our minds work, the way effluents work in the mind, is that they're always reaching outward and trying to be satisfied in some way. In Buddhist cosmology, we talk about the hungry ghosts, these big hulking spirits that have these tiny little mouths and this deep emptiness inside them, this deep hunger, and they're trying to feed themselves through these tiny little mouths, and they can't. And so they constantly just wander around aimlessly hungry. And we can look at that and go, wow, that'd be a really unfortunate rebirth for one of us to have, or any of us to have. But in many ways, that's kind of what we might say the status quo of things, that we are wandering around. In fact, for those of you who are familiar with Buddhist cosmology, we talk about the existence we're in as samsara, that no matter what low hell realm you're in or the highest heaven realm here amongst humans, animals, whatever, this is all samsara. And we tend to think of samsara as a location. But when we translate the term, it really does mean like a wandering, an aimless wandering around, and that's something that isn't a place. It's more a state of mind as we wander around blindly looking for nourishment. And we're being told by the Buddha that there is nourishment right here in the Dhamma. And I think it's important to talk about this positive side of Buddhism and of the Dhamma, because we tend to talk a lot about the negative aspects. We tend to focus on, for example, the fact that there's greed in the mind, that there's animosity in the mind, that there's ignorance and delusion in the mind. We focus on the fact that this samsara that we find ourselves in has a lot of dukkha, it has a lot of suffering and stress. But we can, in that, forget the other side of it, the solution that the Buddha provides. He does talk about the fact that there is stress in the world. He doesn't say that the world is stress, but he says that there's stress in the world. But he also says that there are causes of stress that we can begin to understand and then truly understand, and that there are the ways that we cease stress, the way stress ends. But we can talk about that in a positive way, which is something I don't hear people say a lot, which is it isn't just that we end dukkha and this third noble truth. It's that there's a way of causing happiness. If happiness is the absence of stress, if happiness is the absence of dukkha, then we have sukha that we're developing in the path. And then that gets to the fourth noble truth, which is the path itself. This path that we practice of right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is something that we do that is nourishing. One of my favorite examples is to think about how a farmer nourishes the soil, putting down fertilizer, which this time of year is something I'm more cognizant of. Every time I go for a walk, there's someone putting manure out somewhere on their lawns or something. So the air is filled with this reminder of the importance of nourishing the soil. And so that's what we're doing with the Dhamma, is that we're nourishing the soil of our minds. And that's something that in itself is rapturous and pleasant, delightful. When the Buddha teaches about meditation, he says that there are these two qualities, piti and sukha, which means rapture and bliss, or happiness in this case, that are things that we're trying to develop first through seclusion and then through concentration. And then some people will say that because in later stages of meditation, the Buddha doesn't talk about piti and sukha anymore. He talks about them as things that are kind of set aside, that the path itself doesn't really give a lot of importance to happiness. But I think here in the passage I shared from the Dhammapada, from this chapter I shared, we can see that the Buddha talks about arahants and, enlightened, liberated people as those who are happy always. And being surrounded by people who are cultivating the path, the kalyanamitta that we have, they can also increase our happiness, and we can delight in the company that we have. So that brings us to one of the ways that we can try cultivating the happiness within ourselves, which is to start from the outside. And one of the things that we do is, like today, listening to a Dhamma talk, but also to have a sense of community. The Buddha talks about it here. The language is strong, in this translation, like living with fools. One grieves a long time. Like, well, he's calling people fools. That doesn't sound nice. But like, really, it means someone ignorant or deluded, which is just to say that there are people who are like us, because we tend to live in a state of ignorance and delusion, and we practice the path to hopefully alleviate that, to grow in our discernment, to grow in our wisdom. But that means that we're often in situations where we're the ones working on that. There may not be other people around us working on that, which doesn't mean that we completely shun those people away, but it does mean that sense of community becomes even more important. The Buddha did not define this path as a solitary one. So we need to have a good community of like-minded friends, kalyanamitta. And then we have to do the work of actually practicing with the mind, sitting in meditation, and giving rise to good, wholesome qualities. Some of those qualities we're familiar with. In fact, we even talked about some of them today in terms of metta, in terms of goodwill, loving kindness. And we know that we have these sublime attitudes that we can work on. And they're not just words. They're not just things that we say to ourselves to feel better. And they're not, words that we say out loud to the universe to, again, hopefully feel better. That they are in themselves good determinations, good attitudes that have an effect on what we do in our thoughts, our words, and our actions, or our bodily actions. And so they actually have a real effect. And then beyond that, we can talk about the perhaps more mystical side of it, is that, the way one of my teachers puts it is that out in the world, sometimes people are in a position to appreciate the good you're sending out, these good determinations, these good attitudes that you have. And it's hard to say how they know, but sometimes some people are aware, or they feel it in some way, or you'd be surprised that you can put an intention out into the world, and it might actually make someone, or rather help someone, help themselves. It might give them some extra energy that day. I remember one time one of my teachers was ill, and many of us got together just to send him thoughts of goodwill, send him thoughts of metta. And it could be easy to just look at that and go, all right, that's basically prayer. Like, what effect could it have? But then my teacher will be the same one to say that, having students out there wishing goodwill like that and practicing together as a community so heartily, with so much intention, inspired him to be a better teacher, and to be healthy and want to live longer. And he goes, if you want to ensure your teacher lives a long time, make sure to keep practicing, And so we can see the real world effects of these attitudes that we give ourselves. And I think in them too, we see what the Buddha had in mind with talking about sukha. In one of the the chants that we do on loving kindness, we can see all the way through what it means to be happy in this path. And I'll only chant a little bit of it and then offer translation, because I think it's important to hear how much, in at least my Buddhist tradition, we talk about this quality of sukha. So, in one part, in sending this energy out to all people, we can say, Sabe sata sukhita hontu. May all living beings be happy. Sabe sata habera hontu. May all living beings be free from animosity. Sabe sata abya baja hontu. May all living beings be free from oppression. Sabe sata aniga hontu. May all living beings be free from trouble. Sabe sata sukhi atanang pariharantu. May all living beings look after themselves with ease. And this is something that we do not only for other people, but for ourselves. We have these determinations, these good desires, wholesome desires that we practice on. We really do want to be happy, to be free from animosity, to be free from oppression, to be free from trouble. And then this last part is really important. May all living beings look after themselves with ease. Again, this is a translation that this person chose to translate sukhi or sukha as ease, but it can mean happiness. So we can say here then that may all living beings look after themselves with happiness. So we can say again that it's with happiness that we look after ourselves. That's what we're developing as we liberate the mind. When we free ourselves from oppression, that's what we're doing. We're liberating ourselves. We're living in a state in samsara of oppression. We don't recognize that we're oppressed. And that's a strong way to put it. We don't think about the oppression of the hindrances, the oppression of the effluence, this constant reaching outward, constantly trying to grab at things and hold on to them, clinging and craving. That's what the Buddha says is holding us down, oppressing us. And so we look for an inner spring of happiness. So in this time of happiness and joy and merriment, I hope that we can then work on our inner jolliness and see that as the gift that it is, the gift that we give to ourselves and the gift that we give to others through our actions. So I will end my talk there. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions or comments? It can be directly about the talk, or it can be any questions you have about your practice. I'd be happy to chime in. Tom.
Thank you for the talk. Thank you for reminding us all that Buddhism is not a rocky road, but one which we should take pleasure in, joy, and happiness. It's good to be reminded of that, because there are some teachers who make it such an onerous burden that you wonder, why in hell would you embark on this?
Yeah.
But you show the other side, that it's a good journey and filled with happiness and maybe joy. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And I think it's also so good to realize that we do that as a community. For those of us in the West, as we practice Buddhism, we might feel a bit isolated in our practice, especially if we're the only Buddhists in our family, we're the only Buddhists in our friend group. We don't live in a community at home. It's important to find some semblance of community and really take delight in that, because we support each other. And I really do believe that in this path that we're on, we are trying to be the best versions of ourselves, let's say, which might be a funny way of putting it, but that's not something that can happen alone, I don't think. And certainly the Buddha didn't think so. I mean, the whole Chatuparisa, the Fourfold Assembly, I think is absolutely important. And it's something that I come back to again and again as someone who started out practicing alone. And by practicing alone, I didn't know that the path was something meant to be happy and joyous. It was only in my interactions with fellow students and teachers as well that I got that sense that like we can really enjoy our time together as we develop these good qualities. Yeah, thank you, Tom. So I won't be as bold as Kusala and start calling people out, but I will say that there are times that I've wanted to ask a question when I've been at, listening to Dharma talks, and then I haven't, and then I regret it afterward. I wish I had asked a question. Hannah or Hannah.
Hello. Thank you so much for the talk. It was good to hear today. And I really, when you were reading, I really loved the translation. And I was wondering if maybe you could share in the chat or something the specific book you're reading from.
Yeah, so they are in books, but luckily they're found readily available online. It's on dhammatalks.org, and I will put that into the chat.
Thank you.
And those are translations by Venerable Tanisato Bhikkhu from the Thai forest tradition.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. I find those translations to be some of the most powerful I've read. And then even as I've continued to study the Pali language, I return back and see how those translations compare to others. And I also find them deeply accurate as opposed to some of the more like flowery or poetic ones we can find, or the ones where the translator might have taken some liberties. Even if sometimes the translations I shared today might sound a little clunky, they are very accurate. And I also try to point out as well, like when the translator made a choice. And sometimes the choice isn't clear if you don't read Pali. So, for example, in today talking about happiness, most of the passage talks about ease, like as in the feeling of being easeful. And if you don't know that in Pali, that's still sukha, they're all throughout, you wouldn't know that, oh, we're still talking about happiness here.
Right.
So that's important to know as well.
Yeah. I also wanted to just mention along the same lines that you're saying in this talk and in a previous talk that suffering the Pali word can also be translated as stress, was very helpful to me because I never really thought of suffering and stress being the same. But I checked it out in my experience this week and it's the same. Thank you for that.
Yeah. One of the ways I remind myself on like dukkha as stress is that this is something that the Buddha said exists even in the highest deva realms, like within Buddhist cosmology. So if we assume the devas or the gods to exist, then like even like Brahma, like the chief god, is someone
too?
Has stress.
Wow.
And now it's really refined stress, but like compared to Nibbana. And again, within the Theravada tradition, when we talk about Nibbana, we talk about it as the supreme bliss, the supreme happiness. May all beings attain it. May all beings attain this supreme happiness. And as one of my teachers says, like we're connoisseurs of happiness on this path, which means that like as we continue to develop, we get more and more refined happiness within ourselves, not dependent on anybody else or anything else, which in itself is so freeing. Like when we talk about this oppression, a lot of the times the way we live, we're so dependent on things being a certain way to be happy. And here we are practicing this ability of ours that we do have as a potential in us to have this bedrock, this good support in us, a place where we can really rest on, that is a wellspring of happiness that allows us to do the other work. Like if we're trying to get through greed and aversion and delusion, we can't do that in a state of greed, aversion, or delusion.
Wait, really?
Within the work of meditation.
Yes.
The reason why we meditate the way we do is so that we have a place to rest on. One of my teachers talks about it as like having a perch. You know, it's as if we're this bird tirelessly flapping our wings across an ocean, and then we find an island with a big tree, and now we can finally just perch on that spot, and now we can survey to find a safe place to rest beyond.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
still a
that's
still point.
absolutely. In fact, I think that's more indicative of what one-pointedness actually is. You know, we talk about one-pointedness and concentration, and it seems like we're having this like laser focus. But one-pointedness is really a collectedness, bringing ourselves here to this moment in a collected and tranquil way, in this calming way that gives rise to feelings of pleasure, feelings of joy, feelings of happiness. And it's within a mind that is temporarily free of hindrances that we can do the work of getting rid of the hindrances permanently. You know, that's why the Buddha says that when we begin to meditate, we sit down, bring mindfulness to the fore, and then we set aside greed and distress with reference to the world. So part of our meditation is putting our troubles aside for a moment to have a secure point, and then from that secure point, we can start undoing the knots so that these troubles eventually go away forever.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your amazing Dhamma talk, Stephen Subodha. I think it seems like there are no more questions, and also the time is up. We have to finish the program, and but before that, I should thank again and again to our Dhamma speaker, Stephen Subodha. And you gave a wonderful and a beautiful Dhamma talk, and many blessings to you, much peace and much health to you for sharing your Dhamma knowledge with us and with the congregation members and with everyone. Now it's time for us to turn the page 4 and page 10. Hello. Namo tassa arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief. Vendi dukkang dukkang bhokap unyadi nyaidang yusum sangi nyai kong thai pradao. Vendi dukkang Unyadi Nyai Dang Yu Sung Sangi Nyai Kong Tai Pa Dao Nguyện đi đủ con đức phổ cập nhà đi nhai đăng đủ sung sang nhai con tai pa Thank you again, everyone. And today we made it a time to experience the bliss of this Sunday service. And this is a collective effort. This is not an effort by me or by our Bhante Shanti. And this is a collective effort. We all got together and participated in this Sunday service, and we listened to the Dhamma talk. We practiced a little bit of metta meditation, and we got a time to share our knowledge with each other. Thank you so much again and again. And I should especially thank to our Dhamma speaker, Stephen Subodha. And I should also thank to our Nam, and he's the one who always take care of the Buddha. He offers flowers, fruits to the Buddha, and he's the one who always cleans this shrine room before the Sunday service with the help of our resident monks. Thank you, and much peace and much health to you. And thank you, Ashan Madhusankar. Ashan, he is the same person, whatever the way we call him, Ashan Madhusankar. He's the one who always asked to give this through the Zoom technician. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, our congregation members. Again and again, much health, many blessings, and much peace to everyone. Thank you so much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.